I was not just a Christian. It was my heart, my life. It was my very identity. If accepting Jesus is the answer, like if this is the answer, the Christian message, why isn't it helping people? Why are they still depressed? Why are they still anxious? Why are they still broke?
Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Apostate Aladdin. I make videos talking about my journey out of Islam and other related topics. I wear a mask for my own anonymity and safety, just in case you're wondering. And today I am joined by a special guest who is not an ex-Muslim, never been a Muslim. Nonetheless, he has a backstory that I find very interesting, and it ties into some of what I used to believe in a way. So please welcome Timmy Gibson.
Hey, thanks for having me on, man. Appreciate it.
Of course, happy to have you. So please, Timmy, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you started doing what you're currently doing.
So my story, I was raised in church all my life. I jokingly say I was born on the church pew, though that's not literally true. It just means that from the moment I was born, my family was in church, very involved in church. My mom was the pianist, and my dad was the worship leader. And so from a very early age, I remember being in church. And I think what makes my story quite unique is I was in a Pentecostal charismatic type church. So this is the super conservative, very fundamental, like Bible thumper type church. And, we spoke in tongues. There was gifts of healing. We believed in health and wealth for the Christians specifically. And upon graduating high school, I felt called, which was of the highest call, which is more important than being the president of the United States, according to what I used to believe, was to be in the ministry. So after graduating high school, I went off to seminary or Bible college. Of course, even during Bible college, I was teaching and traveling as an evangelist, and eventually planted my own church and saw it grow pretty rapidly until the point it got to about 300 people. Then I started just having lots of doubts and questions, and really the facts of life and the facts of science kept kind of running into my young earth creationist mind warp. And as I learned more and more that no, evolution is actually true. It's a fact. It's just clearly we don't know all the ins and outs of it, but it's a fact. That really conflicted with my Adam and Eve story 6,000 years ago and young earth and, where'd the dinosaurs fit in? And then as I really began to study and Neanderthals and Decentivans and Homo erectus, I'm like, wait a minute, the Bible doesn't talk about these people. What is going on? And how is it that 98% of all living creatures have gone extinct? Like, how is that God's plan? So that kind of just began my very small, these seeds that eventually now, I would consider myself agnostic. I would say I'm atheist as it relates to the Bible God. I don't believe that God exists at all. But, is there something out there in the universe? I don't know. What happens after death? I've never died, so I don't know. But I feel much better about my perspective on life now than I did as a fundamental evangelical pastor. And I did that for 30 years.
Wow, 30 years.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you're happier now, and you feel like you have a lot more clarity now. So it seems to me like your deconstructing of Christianity is what led to the end of your church and, as you call it, your cult. It wasn't that you realized necessarily that it is a cult, therefore I must end it. It was more, Christianity is not true, I must end this.
Right. Yeah. And it wasn't until later, in fact, for me watching Netflix series on the 7M Dancing for the Devil series that I thought, you know what? I think I might have been a quasi cult leader. And many of the things that Pastor Shin, I think is his name, the things that he was teaching were many of the same things that I was teaching as a pastor. And so it became quite disconcerting when I recognized what I had been involved in and how I was propagating that message.
So that's funny because I also deconstructed partly thanks to cult documentaries. And in my case, it wasn't that I realized that I am in a small, tight-knit community that could be considered a cult. It was me realizing that what the Prophet of Islam, Prophet Muhammad, did is pretty much what a cult leader does. Or at the very least, if I were to think he looks like a cult leader, he talks like a cult leader, he acts like a cult leader, but he's not a cult leader, why? What's the one thing that differentiates him from these other cults? And I found that the biggest differentiator was that he more or less succeeded at a large scale. If it was just him at a small scale, if he did the same exact thing without having a book that everyone agrees is holy, then I would have dismissed him as a cult leader like any of these other cult leaders. So that really helped open my eyes. So I can't imagine what it feels like to not only have that realization about your religion, but realize that you were a figure that was similar to a cult leader. And that's something that I'm curious about, because you say that you're ex-evangelical, ex-Christian, but ex-cult leader. What differentiates your church from a cult? What makes it a cult exactly?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I often get people that make comments and say, well, you still look like a cult leader, which is just so funny. It's like, I can't help the way I look. And I can't help about the way I'm wired as a person, kind of my charisma, which really helped to help me grow a church. And so clearly at the time, I didn't realize it was a cult because, like you said, I wasn't trying to get everybody to drink Kool-Aid and, hey, we're going to meet this spaceship that's behind the Halley's Comet. There wasn't any of that ever in my mindset. I thought in my mind that I was leading people to God and leading people to the truth is how I always looked at it in my mind, that I was a messenger of God. I was doing God's work essentially. And what I was doing was helping people grow closer to this God and his son Jesus that I believed in wholeheartedly. And it took me a lot of time, even in my deconstruction process, to come to terms with that. Yeah, again, I wasn't a full-blown cult leader. I wasn't sleeping with all the members' wives. It wasn't that kind of a cult. But still, yet, when you look up the word cult, it's very much Christianity. In my opinion, most religions are pretty cultish, and it's based upon a belief. It's not based upon evidence. It's just a belief. How I kept people plugged in is you would use, unfortunately, and I feel bad about this, but it was guilt and shame, and it was manipulation. Give to the church, which helps support me as the pastor, but you're giving to God through me, through the man of God. And so, yeah, my ego was ginormous during that time. And it was just an unhealthy perspective on really trying to control people's minds without, in my mind, thinking I'm trying to control their minds. But now looking back, wow, all this teaching, all this manipulation, all the guilt, all the shame that I was using, all these tactics that I was using, now, as an outsider looking in, I'm like, whoa, those are super culty, and that's not good.
So looking back at it, do you think that you were using those tactics of guilting and shaming, knowing that you're guilting and shaming, but excusing it because it's for the greater good, because the ends justify the means? Or did you not realize at all that you were doing that?
Yeah, no, I didn't realize it all at that time. And, it's interesting. Towards the end, I remember reflecting on there would be some cataclysmic event, there's some natural disaster. And I would get up in the pulpit that following Sunday and I would say things like, this is God's cleansing, stay right before God, make sure you're giving and tithing and praying and reading your Bible, because that will keep you protected against all these natural disasters. In other words, I really believed that it was the devil. Like if a hurricane came through and wiped out people, in my mind, according to what I believed at the time, was an act of God to punish the evil in the world. Obviously, I don't believe any of that now. That's just completely goofy. But I really, really believed it. So I never even thought I'm guilting people or I'm manipulating people. But that's exactly what I was doing.
Do you think perhaps that you were doing it because it was kind of done to you back when you were a member, not a leader, and that you've just seen it happen around so often that it's just what you do as a leader of a church?
100%. I mean, I talked about this with the cult to consciousness. I was both a victim and a perpetrator. And both of those it was unknown to me. I didn't realize I was a victim of this wild teaching, especially the group that I was a part of, very fundamental. I mean, I could tell you stories that would just curl your toes of things that I remember being taught about race, about so many different things. And yeah, I was a product of my environment. I mean, when I say I went to church, I wasn't just a Christmas and Easter person. Like, we were going Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night for camp meeting, prayer meetings, fellowships. Like, all of my relationships were in the church. All of my activities were in the church. All my hobbies were revolving around church. Every book I read was revolving around the church. What I watched on TV, like everything was filtered through this fundamental evangelical Christian worldview. So it has been quite a journey to get to this point. I'm 6 years past, and just in the last couple of years have I really began to understand just how toxic really and culty the group that I was in was.
And I'm glad you're getting to those realizations eventually, because some people, they live and they die in that role, and they never acknowledge or they never atone for their sins in a sense, and they never try to change their ways. They're convinced that what they're doing is right and it's for a good cause, and they just double down on it till they die.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that, were you a victim? Were you a perpetrator? And you see yourself as a bit of both. That's something that I like to focus on, is that reminder that a lot of the times people who perpetuate religious abuse are also victims of it themselves. And sometimes it's all they know how to behave. So it doesn't really excuse the behavior. And it's not saying that it is good behavior and it should be condoned or encouraged, but it helps humanize the person who's doing it and get you closer to finding a solution, because just calling them an abuser and shouting at them and, demeaning them is not going to make them change their ways. You actually have to understand where they're coming from, even if they're wrong, to be able to change their ways.
Absolutely. And you mentioned earlier when we first came on, you said something about that, I've escaped and I seem happier, or I am happier. And absolutely. And I think the biggest reason is now life makes sense. There are things that I couldn't reconcile in my former belief system that now I've reconciled. It makes sense, an all-knowing, all-powerful, loving God, and then children with cancer. Like, I could never reconcile that. I could never reconcile how a Christian or anybody that lives their life however they want to live, and then at the end of their life, they gave them their hearts to Christ, and now they're going to go spend eternity forever with God, in heaven on streets of gold, live in a mansion. Yet the person living next to me, who was a kind, caring, loving Hindu or a Muslim or a Jewish person, they're going to go to hell and burn forever and ever and ever. I just couldn't reconcile that. That didn't make any sense, that there's this God who's going to judge you based upon a little belief and not your behavior. Now, of course, I don't believe in any of that. But at the time, that was some of the big things that I wrestled with and that I struggled with. And ultimately, and I say this all the time, for me, my exit from Christianity was in search of truth. That's the truth is what literally set me free from the bondage and the chains of Christianity, which is so crazy for me to say this, because as a pastor, I used to say the exact opposite, that, accept Jesus and he'll free you from the bondage of sin. And now I realize, oh my goodness, no, I was in bondage to sin, if you will. I don't believe in sin, but I was in bondage to this false narrative, this teaching and this belief system that is erroneous. It's just not true. There's no evidence to support it whatsoever. And so, yeah, when I finally let go, and again, it took a while. I kept hanging on to little threads until finally the last thread snapped, and it was wonderful. I couldn't be happier. And I know that shocks many people maybe viewing, and even shocks some of my still Christian friends. They're like, you seem so happy. And I'm like, yeah, I am very happy that I'm free from that toxic belief system.
And I also want to acknowledge that some people who leave religion or become disillusioned with their religion, they fall into a deep pit of depression and they stay there for a while, thinking, what's the meaning of this world? Why am I here? And all that sort of stuff. And for them, somehow, for some of them, they were able to reconcile the evils that you mentioned with a merciful and loving God. So they didn't have as big of a problem, maybe, with having the religion, and reconciling these things. But then without the religion, be it because of these problems or something else, then they have no frame of reference. They're expecting something, and there's a vacuum that religion has filled, and now there's nothing filling that. And my way out of that was realizing that we are just extremely lucky. Even if you have a very difficult life, you're lucky to be able to experience it at all, because you could have been one of the many combinations of reproductive cells that did not make it.
Yeah.
Where the chances that we're here are astronomically low. And
Hmm.
while we're here, we can make the most of it. We're like smart chimps, that just gained consciousness. And now we're arguing about politics and sports and religion and all sorts of things, when we could just appreciate that we're alive and try to make the most of it while we can. And I know it's easier said than done. I know it sounds like a lot of kumbaya, life is beautiful sort of speech, but I know that there's a lot of hardship in life. It's just that it makes more sense to see evil when there's no master pulling the strings than to see evil with a master that's supposed to prevent evil, or that it's all part of his non-evil plan somehow.
Yeah.
So like you said, it's a lot more cohesive this way. You can find peace, you can find a sensible explanation, or even say, I don't know what the ultimate purpose, or if there is an ultimate purpose to all of this existing, or if it's some cosmic coincidence, but I'm here, so might as well enjoy it.
Absolutely. I definitely had probably maybe a year to 2 years of kind of that dark night of the soul, if you will, where I was teetering between, two worlds, and I was struggling with, is it true? And if it is, then like I want to make sure I'm sticking with it. But if it's not, it was my life. That's what some people don't understand, especially when people say, well, you never were really a real Christian, which is so funny. That's just such, I say it all the time. I think that's such an ignorant comment, because I was not just a Christian. It was my heart, my life. It was my very identity. There are people in the city where I live who will see me on the street and call me Pastor Timmy. And I quickly say, I'm not a pastor anymore. I don't believe that. The conversation can go there. I say that. And so for me, it was everything to me. It was my identity. It was my income. I had a fairly medium-sized church, so I had a good income coming from the church. So it wasn't something that I took lightly. But when I have people say things like, how'd you find purpose and meaning? I hope I have a good answer eventually at some point. I'm still trying to figure out how I was able to just make that shift. And I do find life so beautiful. And, I have a wonderful wife. And so I'm sure that's part of it. I love nature and I love life. I have a good community of friends. So I'm sure all of that contributes to my journey and how I was able to journey through it pretty well. But man, yeah, I really encounter people who they're really struggling and they find themselves going through depression. I don't know if I'm just not wired that way. I'm pretty optimistic just most of the time. I've always been that way. My mom often tells me that I was always a very happy kid. Maybe again, like you said, we're just lucky to be here. I'm also just lucky to be wired how I'm wired, I suppose, because once I went through that little bit of darkness, it's all light. Now, I'm not saying I don't have bad things happen. I don't, I mean, of course I'm human. I got COVID, I mean, like life is life, but I just don't struggle anymore with, man, I wonder if it is true. Like, am I going to go to hell? It's almost like if someone tried to scare me with Santa's naughty and nice list. Like, really? Like, you can't scare me with Santa's list. I don't believe in that. I don't know. I mean, how did you work through that?
So I did suffer. That's the thing. I suffered from a depression before I left the religion. So it wasn't like I was happy with the way that it was
Ah,
explained to me. I was unhappy, and I didn't even link the two concepts together for a long time. I just thought, my life is going really well. I'm very blessed. I'm doing well in school. I'm doing well in life. Why am I still deeply unhappy and confused and anxious all the time? And a big factor was the question of, how is there cosmic justice? How how does it all make sense? Because I saw, and I just made a video about this actually, the concept of a disbeliever in Islam is like someone who knows that Islam is the truth, but is rejecting it because of his evil nature, because of worldly desires, because of whatever other reason. There is no room in Islam for someone who's genuinely not convinced, who honestly does not believe. There are so many labels, and all of them ascribe some motivation or another to your disbelief. And I
Hmm.
could see even from a very young age that that's BS. There are a lot of people, especially when I started meeting them and encountering all sorts of people from all walks of life, people like you who genuinely believe what they believe, and they'll die on that belief. They'll go to war for that belief. And sometimes it's not even a harmful belief. So how come they deserve to be tortured just because they were born in the wrong place or to the wrong parents?
Yes.
So I was struggling with that stuff way before I left the religion. And when I left, I still had a lot of that carryover depression, I suppose, and that shock of I've been lied to my whole life. What does this mean at all? Why am I here on this earth? And in the absurdity of it all, in realizing that none of it actually has inherent meaning, we've been making up stuff, including our
Right.
parents, including their parents, including the so called prophets. We're just trying to find meaning in this world. So you find your own meaning, and that doesn't mean that you can go around and harm people. As
Right.
long as it's not harmful for yourself or someone else, as long as it's positive, as long as it's beneficial, then you could do whatever the hell you want. And that is so freeing, because not only am I now free to think and do things that used to be such a grave sin, even a thought crime before, just the questioning of God was a thought crime, but now I get to take a more pragmatic, more realistic approach to harm and benefit. There is no afterlife that's going to balance the scales. There's no reward or punishment that comes hypothetically later.
Right.
This is what you get. So, yes, life is unfair. There are a lot of people who get away with doing bad things, but that's just all the more reason for us to make sure that they don't get away with bad things.
Yeah.
That's a reason for us to make the world that we live in a better place, because we only get one shot at this as far as we know, unless reincarnation is true or unless there's some
Sure.
concept of an afterlife. But we can't live as if there absolutely is. We have to assume that this is all we get. And that's kind of how I got out of it. But it's funny to me that you are accused of having not been a Christian. I and anyone else in my position gets accused of having never been a true Muslim. And even though I was never, a church leader or a mosque leader or anything of that sort, I don't think we need to qualify it. And I'm not saying you're doing that, but I don't think we need to feel the pressure to qualify it that I was an amazing believer and that's why I get to criticize it, or that's why I'm valid to leave now. Anyone is valid to leave their religion. They
Absolutely.
just, yeah, they gatekeep it very hard. But if a pastor gets it from a Christian audience, or an ex-pastor, an ex-Muslim gets it from a Muslim audience, it shows you that it's not really about the truth of the claims or how skeptical they are about the claims. It's just about that rejection, this thought-stopping cliche, is essentially, of saying, let's discredit the person making the criticism rather than actually think about it. And that's common among the two religions and
Yeah.
many others.
Yeah. And that's something you mentioned. I saw this a lot too. As a pastor, and this was another thing that I couldn't reconcile, is if accepting Jesus is the answer, like if this is the answer, the Christian message, why isn't it helping people? Why are they still depressed? Why are they still anxious? Why are they still broke? Why are they still sick? Why are their children still dying? Why are they still losing their jobs? I really struggled with, if Jesus is the answer, like truly, then upon accepting Jesus, your life should definitely be better. Now, I'm sure there are some people who can say that. They said, hey, I was a drug addict and I accepted Jesus and whatever. That's okay. But again, as a former Christian, I would hear stories about that with people who became Buddhist or who just believed in a higher power. Or, in other words, it wasn't exclusive to Christianity. Like only Christianity is delivering people from addiction. Only Christianity is saving people's marriages. That's absolutely not true. The divorce rate is the same in the church as it is outside the church. The addiction rate is the same in the church as it is out of the church. It's the same. And so that was another big piece for me that I really struggled with. Does that make sense? Like there is no qualifiable, measurable difference that I'm seeing in a Christian's life over an unbeliever's life. And so that was a big ticket item for me that just the scales were torn away from my eyes, and I could see so clear that, okay, I know some atheists that have great marriages and they're financially blessed. Like, how is this possible? They are working for the devil, you know?
I think this speaks to the vagueness of praying to God and the results that you're supposed to expect. So if you pray to God or to any entity, to, your religion of choice, and you get good results for other reasons, you might ascribe that to God's blessing. If you don't get results, you say, well, maybe God is holding out, something greater for me, or maybe my reward is in the afterlife. So I think that concept of giving God the benefit of the doubt, no matter what the result is so unfair, because you can't test it. You can't do an experiment where you pray to
Right.
this God or that God and see which one gains better results, because there's always going to be that clause that says, if you don't get the result that you expect, it might just happen after you die, which is the biggest cop out, because no one's going to be here after we die to compare notes and see which religion actually is true, as far as we know. But to play devil's advocate, or Jesus's advocate in this case, for a second, what if they say that the people who aren't getting results in this life, who Jesus is not helping with their marriage or their finances or whatever it might be, that's because they're not praying hard enough. They don't have the right faith. They're doing it
Mm.
selfishly. They're not doing it because they love Jesus. They're doing it as a transaction. And that's why Jesus is not giving back. What would you say to that?
Well, that's exactly what I used to say. I would literally say that. I'd say, well, there must be some kind of sin in their life. They're not praying according to God's will, or they don't have enough faith attached to their prayer or with their prayer. And now I would just say that's just completely wrong. I don't even know how to say that, except that there is no proof of that. And it just puts it out into the mystical, magical, that, if you get blessed, it's because God is blessing you for your good deeds. And or if something bad happens, you're being punished for your bad deeds. Or we used to even say, if you're doing good things and you're following God, watch out, because the devil, now the devil's got your number and he's looking to bring you down because you're a threat to his kingdom. So it was like you couldn't win for losing. But it was all about this afterlife. It was all about, hey, what you're doing now, you're just building up jewels for your crown in heaven. I always used to hear this. This is how I viewed Islam back in the day when I was a Christian. The bombers they're going to get 72 virgins, in heaven for this act of killing the infidel.
Mhm.
It's this belief, and I used to think that was absolutely nutty, a nutty belief and untrue. And now I realize that I was propagating a similar message, just different, but similar in putting the hope into an afterlife, which can never be disproved or proved. You just can't prove
Mhm.
it or disprove it that, hey, you have a hard life now, you're broken, sick now, or you lost your child now, but you'll be reunited in heaven and you'll spend eternity. Now I just find that that's to me, that's so toxic. And that's
Mhm.
putting just false hope in someone's mind. But also, I think that's another reason why so many Christians are unhappy, depressed, and full of anxiety, because they can't reconcile. They're like, I'm doing all these good things. My life should be better. Like, this God who controls the universe should be blessing me. And yet I'm not being blessed. That really causes a lot of conflict and unrest, in your heart. I know it did for me, and I know it did for a lot of people. I worked as a pastor. I did a lot of counseling. We called it biblical guidance at the time. And I can't tell you how many people sat in my office and crying and distraught and suffering and broken and just trying to get God to move on their behalf. And he was silent, silent.
Mhm.
And I know why now. Again, it all makes sense now. But at the time, it did conflict me, like, why, where is God for these
Mhm.
people that are suffering so terribly?
I can draw a milder example for an analogy or a parallel. Instead of the 72 virgins example, which, by the way, some people contest the number, like the concept is not necessarily contested, but they say that the number is wrong. that's not the point, because I know there's going to be Christians in the comments who say, well, in Christianity, it's not saying go hurt people. So it's a completely different story. But
Sure.
there are a lot of milder examples in Islam where it's just, do good things or sacrifice things for God and you get an extra whatever in heaven. So you talk about jewels on your crown. In Islam, there's the concept of you get an extra tree or more land or a bigger house or another house or mansion, which always made zero sense to me since I was a child, because I would ask if I could wish for anything, right? Almost anything. Can't I just wish for another mansion once I get there? Like, why am I pre-investing when I have infinity wishes when I get there? And why would I care how big of a mansion or how big of a land I have when the possibilities of what I could do in heaven are endless? Like, it still seemed like a keeping up with the Joneses even in heaven, in a way. So that didn't make sense to me, but there are parallels to be drawn that aren't necessarily about violence. And to take a shot at how to answer someone who makes up apologetics for why God is absent or why God's not answering or why we're not seeing the results that we want, I would say that try to think of this relationship, this dynamic with any human being in your life. Be it your boss who promises things will come after you retire, or be it a partner or a parent, you'll quickly realize that you would not take this BS from anyone in your life, and you should not take it from anyone in your life, because that is an abusive dynamic. You cannot have a relationship with no consistency without knowing what the results are, where the other person is moody. He might smite you at any moment. He might punish you. He might forgive you. And when people bring up God's mercy, for example, as a counter to God's brutality, I don't think that's good enough. That's like having a parent who sometimes might beat the hell out of you and sometimes might give you a cookie. It doesn't make up for it just because he's very kind sometimes and very brutal sometimes. I think what we need, what we seek is consistency. And in the lack of that consistency, that's where the anxiety and depression comes up that you were describing.
Yeah.
Going back to your church, or as you called it, your cult, what are some of the examples of things that you would consider very culty that someone outside of the church would see and immediately spot as culty?
Probably the concept of giving to the church was in fact giving to God, or blessing the man of God, the pastor, the one in charge. By blessing that person, you were essentially blessing and giving to God. As pastors, we were God's anointed. We were doing the work of God in the earth. Anytime that you could be blessing, the pastor, you were essentially blessing your soul and blessing yourself for the afterlife. And especially when it came to sharing your faith, we were big on what's called evangelism, which is, share your Christian faith with coworkers and with friends and with neighbors. And that as you do that, you're laying up treasures. It's a Bible verse. We'd say you're laying up treasures in heaven. What seems like just something simple here and now is really doing something for you in eternity. And we did the same things. We talked about mansions and bigger mansions. And there was this concept we talked a lot about, jewels in your crown, that, you'd wear a crown, which I'm thinking that'd be kind of uncomfortable to wear a crown all the time. But anyway, you'd have a crown, and the more jewels represent the people that you led to Christ. So there was just a lot of that manipulation. And again, back to the guilt and the shame and things, that the tactics that I was using. Again, at the time, I didn't know they were tactics. I thought I was just promoting and propagating the truth. That's the thing, is even some of my friends today that I know are still in that world, they think they are about the truth. They think they've got it right. And some of my friends are really good people, and I've had very open and honest conversations with them, and they've been very honest with me that they think I've been blinded by the devil and I've been misled. And that's why I do understand when people say, well, you must have not really ever been a Christian. Because when I was a Christian, I could have never, ever imagined. And I would have told you, I would put my children's lives on the line to say that, yeah, I'll never leave the faith. I was absolutely certain of that. And so to be where I am today, as shocking as it is for some people, to be honest, it's more shocking to me. It's just, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. And, the weird thing is too, and I'm sure it's like this for you, if you said everything that I'm going to ask you, Timmy, answer as an evangelical Christian, well, I can tap into that part of my brain and I could answer, quote scripture, and tell you things as that Christian part. So often when I'm talking to a Christian, I know as I'm saying something, I know what they're thinking. I know what they're going to say. I know their response. I know the Bible verse they'll probably bring up. I don't know I don't know if that's how you are with Islam. It's just a fascinating conundrum to have been so convinced of something and then now to be on the outside looking in and just shaking my head. Wow, I used to think that too. And I just could never think that now. People say, do you think you could ever come back to the faith? No, there's just no way I could ever come back to the faith.
It seems impossible to see it the same way again. And it's kind of a blessing and a curse because, as you said, you kind of know what the believer is thinking and what they're going to say next almost. And it makes these conversations frustrating and maybe even boring or uninteresting for some of us because it's nothing we hadn't heard before. But it's also a blessing because you can understand where they're coming from, as opposed to someone who has never been a believer, for example. They might dismiss their beliefs as genuinely evil or from a bad place or disingenuous when they actually mean well. Most of the time, they're just under a false premise. Their starting point is different than yours. I put my apologist hat on all the time to revise my own thoughts and my own criticism of the religion to make sure that it's thorough, that I'm not just throwing out whatever it is to slander the religion. I'm actually thinking it through as a believer would, because that's essentially what I did when I was getting out of religion, not with the intention of getting out of religion, with the intention of keeping the faith. I was that apologist for myself.
Yeah.
So it's interesting looking back at it and seeing those patterns in the believers that we speak to.
Yeah.
And I'm very curious, as someone who was Muslim around the same time that you were a Christian preacher, I have the story where one time at a Walmart, I was invited to join a Bible study group. And I didn't exactly know when they first started talking to me that it was a Bible study group, but then I got curious. And I was still a Muslim at the time, but I was really questioning. And I was curious not because I thought maybe Christianity is the answer. I just wanted to see what the inside of that group looked like and to compare it with my group. So it wasn't nefarious. I was just very curious. And when they took my number and then they asked me what my religious background is, and I said, oh, I'm from a Muslim background, they ghosted me so fast. I never heard from them ever again. And I don't feel bad about it. Yeah, I'm assuming it's because they knew it was a lot more that they could handle, because I'm not just a Christian who fell off the wagon, so to speak, and they just need to remind me of why I need to be a better Christian. I'm going to have a whole nother type of question for them that they are not equipped to handle, especially if they're like a youth pastor. So I guess my question for you is, when you were recruiting people or inviting people into your church, did you get or target recruits from outside of Christianity, or was it just Christians?
Yes, I would definitely target people of other faiths. Were all wrong in my view as an evangelical Christian. Muslims were the evilest of the evil, very evil. Hindus seem to be a little bit not as evil, but just misguided and incorrect. And then Judaism was they just needed to take one more step. They just needed to accept Jesus as the Messiah. My personal, again, at the time, my view of Muslims was just absolute a work of the devil. And it was just completely the enemy to my Christian faith, which is so ironic that they're the three Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. They all come from Abraham, but Muslim was just the worst of the worst as a Christian. I remember knowing that, thinking that, feeling that, and even teaching that at times when I would talk about other world religions.
Mm-hmm. I get that all the time when there are Christians who stumble upon my videos and they leave a comment saying something to the effect of, yes, please, thank you for exposing this satanic cult and you should find Jesus and so on. And I'm like, that's not the point. You missed the mark on that one. We agree Islam is not true, but not for the same reasons. It's not because the devil is doing something. I don't think the devil is real. That includes your devil, and the Christian God as well. So they're welcome to watch, but I just want to make sure that they get the message that this is not just to give you ammunition to prop up your religion while putting another one down. This commentary can very easily apply to both religions. A lot of what I say, the same concepts are in Christianity as well. But what I meant to ask by targeting, I mean, I like that answer because it's very honest, but not just targeting in criticism and targeting in, preaching about, but in preaching to. Did you preach to people of other faiths, or was it just preaching to Christians?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Anybody that was lost, again, which what I believed at the time was anyone not evangelical Christian was lost or misguided or following a false religion. That Christianity was the only true religion that everyone needed to follow, because otherwise they were going to burn in hell forever.
So did that message resonate with or work on anyone to the point that they were recruited into your church, anyone who wasn't a Christian to begin with, or did it just work on Christians?
It seemed like it only worked on Christians. Yeah, I never converted anyone to Christianity. In fact, as an evangelist, I did a lot of what they call altar calls, and I would invite people forward to accept Christ. These were all people who were what you would probably say culturally Christian, or what we would say backslidden, meaning they were Christian at some point and they had just kind of walked away from the church for whatever reason. So they still believed in Jesus. They still believed in God. They still even believed that the Bible was the Word of God. They just weren't participating in church. So when people would give their hearts to Christ and you would talk to them, you'd come to find out, well, they were actually already Christian. They were just away from the church. They weren't atheists. I wasn't leading someone who was an unbeliever truly with forethought, like someone that's really thought about it and worked on their unbelief, and then they all of a sudden switched to Christianity. I never personally experienced that, and I'm sure that's out there, but I never personally experienced that.
So I guess my question becomes, a person who's a Christian but is not practicing, who backslid, let's say that, is someone who's worthy of attempting to save. But someone who's an atheist or a Muslim or Hindu or something else, I'm assuming you also thought they're worthy of saving, right? But
Yes.
how come you didn't, and it's not just you, but a lot of preachers, I assume, how come you're not targeting those people necessarily, but you were going for the easier route of just fixing up Christians who already believe?
Yeah, because that was nearly impossible. It's nearly impossible. It'd be like someone trying to witness to me today. There's just nothing that you could say that is going to convert me back to Christianity or to any religion for that matter. So in fact, if I put myself in those shoes, I think when I was a Christian, if someone from the Muslim faith or someone from the Hindu faith or even Buddhism would have tried to convert me, there was just no way. I was completely convinced that I had the truth and that they needed to switch to the faith that I had. And so there was just no point, because I remember there was a neighbor friend of ours way back when I was pastoring, and they were a Hindu family. They were the sweetest, kindest, most wonderful people from India. Clearly, who you follow as a religion typically is geographically determined. And they were new to the United States, and my son played with their son. And we had conversations before about, because I was very curious about Hinduism and what they actually believed, because I was vaguely familiar with it. But I remember asking them a lot of questions. They didn't ask me any questions. I remember, and they knew I was a pastor, and they really weren't curious about Christianity. But I was curious of Hinduism, actually, I think because I was going to be teaching on world religions. And so I was using it as a study opportunity, really. But I in no way was trying to persuade them to, hey, ditch Hinduism, come on over here to the Christian side, because I knew that just there's no way that would work.
I'm kind of torn on what to think of preachers who specialize in that, because there are preachers to Christianity, for example, who specialize in criticizing Islam for the sole purpose of, fighting the devilish religion and also recruiting people who are no longer Muslim or who might have doubts about the religion to say, here's a better alternative. And I'm torn, because if they're doing it with good intentions, they genuinely think that they're saving people,
Right.
and they really mean to save them. But on the other hand, it's also kind of predatory, especially someone who's just raw out of leaving a religion and is trying to find sense in the world. It's not a good time to then throw them into another cult, use the same tactics, just with a different label, and say that now they're saved. I
Yeah.
think that's predatory. So I
Yeah.
can acknowledge that some of them might even have good intentions and might be doing it to save you because they genuinely just want to save you, not necessarily because they want more jewels on their crown. I can't tell people's intentions, but from the outside, it's still predatory, even if you have good intentions.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you are no longer a cult leader, but you are a charismatic person and you're still more or less the same person that you were a few years ago. I mean, I'm sure a lot about you has changed, but the underlying person is the same. You're just not using your powers for evil, let's say, or you're not misleading people with your powers. So how can someone know that they can trust you in whatever venture that you're undertaking and that you're not using the same tactics just under a different label?
Well, I don't have a compound that people can move into.
That's a good start. Yeah.
That I have had that question before, when people talk to me that now, you were cult leading before, now you're just switching teams. That's a fair question, honestly. And I always say this, I'm not looking to build any kind of commune. I just simply am telling my story. In fact, when I left that world, I had no intentions of ever talking about this, to be honest. It was a very personal journey away from religion. And in fact, if you look at even my YouTube channel earlier on, I was talking about relationships and how to get along with other people and various topics like that. Never had more than 400 subscribers. I stumbled into this and onto this and felt like, you know what, I do want to share my journey because I know there are a lot of people maybe like me who were in it, yet had lots of doubts and questions and really struggled because, again, my pursuit was of truth. I really have always been a curious person. I'm an avid reader. I read about a book a week. I love to read. I love to learn. I love to know. I want to know things as much as we can know. There are clearly a lot of unknowns, but if there's something that we can know, I want to know it. And that's what led me away. So I didn't jump out of being a cult leader in a religion to say, hey, I want to jump out and now be a cult leader for non-religion. And ironically, a lot of cult leader, the background seems to be religious. I talked to someone that was in Heaven's Gate not too long ago, and they got out right before they all committed suicide. And I asked him, I said, well, how'd you get into it? And he said, they were just doing a little Bible study at this dude's house. And I thought, interesting. He said, yeah. He said it was just really Christian at first, and then it got squirrelier as it went along. So yeah, I'm not trying to gather people on a compound. I'm not trying to get people to buy my product. Here's my little jar of oils or whatever. I'm not selling anything like that. Basically, I'm just telling and sharing my story of how I deconstructed and what a benefit it's been to my life, how much of a joy it is to live free from that teaching. Yes, I have a very charismatic personality. I'm a public speaker. I still do public speaking now when I'm invited to, but I'm not trying to collect everyone around just a certain thing that I believe and reject every other belief. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I relate to that. I mean, at no point was I a cult leader, and I have no aspirations to become one, even though I might joke about it every now and then.
Sure.
But my way of reassuring people, whether it's the topic of cults or something else, I reassure them by reminding them that I don't claim to have the ultimate truth. I just tell you how I think. I tell you what I found, and I encourage you to dig and find your own answers and disagree with me if you don't agree with me. That is absolutely allowed and encouraged. And I don't want it to be a cult of personality thing either. So don't take opinions that I have just because you might like me as a person. In fact, if you like me, that's more reason to be skeptical and scrutinize what I say, because you don't want any bad opinions to slide in under the guise of, oh, well, he's a good guy and I trust him. So I guess reminders to people that no matter how much you like the person, still scrutinize their words as if you don't like them. Just find the truth. The truth has nothing to do with how much you like it or don't like it.
I'm not trying to tell people what to think. I'm just encouraging them to think. And that's something that I say often because it's true. What happens after we die? Like you said, I don't know. Is reincarnation a thing? I don't know. I've not died and been reincarnated as far as I know. So I'm not telling people, here's the truth, like trust everything I say. I'm just saying, hey, that wasn't the answer. So,
Mhm.
Do your own research, look into things. Don't just say things because you've heard the pastor say it. Really research it. For the longest time, I taught against evolution. And again, I could tell you things that would just curl your toes or you'd fall out of your chair. That dinosaur bones, for example, were created by the devil. Dinosaurs never existed on Earth. Those were a creation by the devil, put them in the earth to deceive, and that the earth was created old. The reason scientists study it and it seems old is because God created it old. I mean, there was all these things that I taught that I now just go, brother, I can't believe I taught this. And I would jokingly say, I'm not from a monkey. If you want to be from a monkey, you can be one. I would say all these things, and it's just ignorance. I was ignorant. I was very ignorant. I was misguided, misled, and brainwashed, really. And I've been set free.
In Islam, there's this idea that the Prophet had split the moon to show people a miracle. And not all Muslims believe this, because some think that the verse refers to something that's going to happen in the future, but some think it actually happened. And there used to be this image circulating on the internet back in the days of chain email, where they would show a crack on the moon, a picture, and say that NASA has confirmed that the moon was actually split in half, to the point that NASA had to issue a statement on their website saying, no, we do not say this. Like, this picture might be of a crack or a crater or something, but this is not throughout the length of the entire moon. And the justification that some Muslims had was that God did it, but then he hid the signs. So he didn't leave a crack in there. He just fused it back as if nothing happened. And I like to think, what's the simplest explanation that doesn't require a lot of assumptions? That it never happened to begin with, or that God did it to show people and then hid it so that now you have to use your faith and it's not to show people. So it's difficult to think about it this way critically when you're a believer, but when you leave, it's very obvious. So I guess
Yeah.
my question for you would be, what advice or words of wisdom would you give to someone who might be in a religion or a cult and they're not able to self-reflect on it?
Yeah, for me, it was reading. There was a book called Sapiens by Yuval Naval Herrera, I
Noah
think.
Harari. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've read the same book. Yeah.
Oh, that book. That book. At the time, I was a Christian when I read that book. I can't remember what chapter, but when I got to the human history of the Neanderthals, I thought, wait a minute, that is not anywhere in Christian teaching. There is no room for a species of human that has gone extinct. Like, this is completely outside of my Christian worldview. This isn't even anything that ever that I ever hear about. Because here's what I remember what I used to say about this. I would say, people say that we come from monkeys. That's not true. They develop this whole theory based upon a molar, one molar. I used to say that from the pulpit publicly. And then I come to find out that that's not true at all. And much like the crack in the moon, that was something that Christians would say to just get you to dismiss evolution. And so I thought, okay, I'm not going to just say and believe things based upon, I heard it from a preacher or I read it in a Christian book. But then I decided I want to understand as a student, what is evolution? And that is when it really started to unravel for me. So that would be my advice. My wisdom would be, hey, listen, don't be in an echo chamber. Don't always just, if you have questions, go ask your pastor or ask another Christian friend. Actually look into what are the experts, the people that really know. What do they say? And again, that was also a big help for me when I was looking into Bible scholars and biblical historians and coming to find out that a lot of them were agnostic. I thought, wait a minute, these are experts in this religion that I follow. These are people that they know Greek, they know Hebrew, they've seen the Dead Sea Scrolls, they've studied the Dead Sea Scrolls. Like, these are real scholarly people and they know. So when I began to learn that most of them were agnostic, or at least definitely not fundamental, it threw me for a loop. But I turned into it and just kept learning and researching and reading. So that would be my advice, is just don't take someone's word for it. Look into it genuinely, and then, draw your own conclusions, I guess, from there.
Usually the advice that I hear from the religious side is don't listen to those people because those people
Right.
are speaking falsehood, or, don't trust that source or that source. I would advise you not just to go and trust the experts, read as much as you can from conflicting opinions, immerse yourself in the criticism that you might be afraid of or that you're told to avoid, because the truth is the truth and it would stand up to any scrutiny, no matter how
Absolutely.
harsh this criticism is. So if you genuinely hold the truth and you're confident of it, or you want to be confident that you hold the truth, scrutinize it in every way from every possible angle, and don't just do it with the intention that I'm doing this because I want to prove to them that my religion is actually true. Just have no audience, have no ego, just you and the text, and look into it. Because I get that a lot. I get that comment, someone, a Muslim, saying, "Subhanallah, this made my faith stronger," as a response to a criticism that I made or someone else made. So it's sort of a stubborn, even though you criticized it, I'm even more of a believer now.
Yeah,
And it's clear that it's performative. It's
sure.
it's not actually that you've digested the information and you came out of it with a stronger faith. It's just with no qualifiers. This is so bad. My religion is so good. And I see that with Christians as well who say the same exact thing. So let go of the stubbornness, remove the ego out of it. No one's watching you. You don't have to debate anyone. It's just you and the truth, and try to figure it out. That's my advice.
Because if it is true and you dig, it will just wind up being true. Again, the truth is what set me free from it, because I never did ever really research and look into it. I just took it all by faith. So I love what you just said. Yeah, if it's truly true, it'll wind up being true even after you really look at it critically.
The last question that I have for you is going to be kind of a difficult one, or at least for me, it's a heavy topic. So, given that you've done a lot of things in your past that you aren't happy about, or things that you now see are incorrect or possibly harmful to other people, and you continue because you're human, you continue to make mistakes and do things that might harm people, and you no longer have the avenue of asking God for forgiveness or atoning for your sins or clearing your slate, so to speak. How do you deal with the guilt of the mistakes and knowing that there is no cosmic justice that will make it up for those people?
Yeah, for me, I really believe in the power of forgiveness and repentance, and not to God, because I don't believe that, but to the person themselves, to individuals. For example, there was a same-sex couple that was in my church when I was a pastor. When it was legal in our state, they asked if, hey, would you marry us? And I didn't, because at that time, I didn't believe in same-sex marriage. And I've now then later gone back to them. This has been years ago now. Went back to them and apologized for my Christian judgment upon them. And I just said, hey, listen, I at the time I thought it was wrong. I don't think that now, but I would like to say I'm sorry for that. And that, I'm really glad that you were able to find someone to marry you, and I hope you're doing well. And they were very kind in their response back. So now in my life, if I do something wrong, I'm not a big believer in regrets, because I don't see how that's going to help me, but I do want to learn from my past mistakes. And I try to right the wrongs as much as I can. And now how I try to live my life is just don't do those things. If I know something's wrong, try not to engage in that behavior. People talk about where's your moral compass come from now? And that's such a weird question to me, because even some of my Christian friends have said, man, you're not living in a van down by the river, using drugs. I'm like, no, I didn't leave my Christian life so that I could live a derelict life. I still am living as moral as I possibly can. I love people. I still love myself. I love my wife. I want to do good. I want to bring good and not bring harm. And part of that journey is what I'm doing now, sharing the truth as I see it, and the importance of loving yourself and loving our planet and loving other fellow humans and doing right by them is an important piece in my life, for sure, even though I'm not a Christian anymore.
Well, I really appreciate your honesty there and your advice for the people who might need it. And I appreciate you sharing everything so openly, because part of the reason why I wanted to invite you here is to get inside the head, or, humanize basically a cult leader, even though you're not one anymore. And I'm not saying that there are clear parallels between you and Muhammad, but you're two different flavors of what could be considered a cult leader or a religious leader or a big personality that people idolized at some point. And I don't want the takeaway from my criticism of Islam or of the Prophet to be that that is a malicious figure that did everything with the intention to harm people. I try to charitably look into how he could have done it with the best intentions. It's not necessarily a true narrative to paint him as an evil villain who did everything with bad intentions. And it's not because I care about his reputation per se. It's because when you make criticism that is unjust and not accurate, you will push away a lot of people who would have been receptive to the criticism had it been more balanced and more realistic. So I don't want to turn away people who aren't convinced that he's a genuinely terrible person. So I wanted to bring on someone who was convinced that they were doing the right thing. And you didn't commit the same kind of crimes that Muhammad did, I hope. You did things that you regret and you acted in a way that you now think is wrong, but you demonstrate, at least based on your claims, that it wasn't with bad intentions. You thought that you were working for God. You thought that God was working through you. So people can do things with good intentions that are harmful, but it's good to reflect on your actions and find a way out of that behavior if you find something wrong with it. So thank you for taking all these steps and for sharing them with us.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Just one last thing I thought of. I actually, as I was beginning to come to the truth as I see it now, I remember I had a pastor friend of mine say, "Hey, listen, just keep those thoughts to yourself. You're going to blow your church up. You're going to ruin everything. Just stay with the message and keep your private thoughts and questions and doubts to yourself." And that to me was a conflict because I want to be true to myself. Like I truly feel the way I feel and I share. So as the truth was becoming clear to me, I couldn't preach something that I knew was a lie, that I knew was untrue. I couldn't say this was true when I knew that it wasn't true. And that was another big factor in my walking away is I could no longer get up in front of a congregation and teach something that I didn't wholeheartedly believe in myself. That was a really important piece in that journey. So now there are some people that are just corrupt and they're just terrible people. I'm sure they know it's not right and they're doing it anyway. They're just con artists. I bet they're out there. But for most people who are religious, even when they say mean things, even in the comments on my videos, they say mean things to me. I don't take it too much to heart because I know that they mean well and they think they're just doing the work of God.
Yeah, that's a good outlook to have, and the most productive outlook to have, in my opinion. So thank you again for the recap and for being here. And I just want to tell the audience that I found you through Cults to Consciousness, through an interview that you did with them, and then a live stream. So a lot of the topics that we covered today, you covered in more depth with them. Things about, what is speaking in tongues, your tattoos, all that kind of stuff. So if you want the insider scoop, I suppose, go check out those videos. I'll have the links in the description. And also check out Timmy's channel. Also, links are going to be in the description. Give us a little glimpse of what you talk about today on your channel.
So today, what did I talk about today? I did recently on tongues. The end. The end is of Christianity and the end of most religions. I think will happen by 2099. Now that's not an exact prediction.
Okay, you're starting to concern me because that sounds like a cult leader prophecy right there.
Well, that. To be honest with you, that's my clickable clickbait.
Right.
Literally giving a prediction because there's so many Christians right now that are that end time prediction that Jesus is going to come back in 2024, and so yeah, I was kind of capitalizing on that whole idea to do my own quasi prediction that I think as we increase in knowledge and as science discovers more and more, I think religion will be, if not completely evolved differently, it will be a very small remnant of people holding on to it. And that's just my opinion. It's really not a prediction. It's just my opinion.
I don't even know if I agree with that. I think it's going to be a lot longer of a path than we think it is. Like, it's optimistic to think that within a couple of generations of children, it will be forgotten. But I get where you're coming from. And, as long as it's not a prediction, as long as it's not some kind of doomsday
No.
prediction, then,
I don't know. I'm not saying this is exactly, but I had someone make that comment, what you just said. They said, I think it'll be more people will, in pain and suffering, they'll double down and it could even grow. But that's very true. It could, it could grow, but I could see how people might turn to it to find more comfort in the future. Who knows?
Yeah. Nobody knows the future, and you're not claiming to know the future. So
Oh,
that's
Lord, no.
reassuring because you used to and you don't anymore. So that's good. Thank you once again, Timmy, for joining and for being so open. Go check out his channel. Let us know if you have any more questions that maybe we can answer again in the future, or go ask him on his channel. I'm sure he'll be happy to do a video about some of your questions. So, leave a comment there. Is there anything that you want to add before we wrap up?
No, that's it. I just really appreciate you and your channel and what you're doing. And thanks for having me on. This was super cool.
Of course. Thanks. I had a lot of fun. And thank you everyone for watching or listening. Thanks to my supporters, patrons, donors for helping make this happen. I could not do this without you. And as always, think critically and think for yourself, and consider watching one of these videos next. All right, that is a wrap.